What a great panel that was earlier. Although I was saying it's so interesting how all of them talked about how their mothers and their grandmothers and that legacy of women in the kitchen were their inspiration. And we can't find enough women chefs to put on panels, Hoda. Sa? Okay. Maybe the women need to clap louder for that. Okay, let's get started. They're all too busy doing everything and being everything to everyone, right? Yeah, okay. on a Friday morning. And only a woman would do the talks on a Friday morning. Abla Salah, come in. Okay, so I'm gonna start a little bit intensely, Nader, if you don't mind, by means of introduction of you, okay?
Keep the intro short.
Should I keep it short?
Boring. You don't want to bore people with it.
No, not my intros. Okay, so I think the world is aggressively fracturing, right? And these cataclysmic cracks that are being created are essentially around identity politics. And in its essence, what does identity politics mean? It's the difference between the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are, the stories that shape our beliefs and our identities and who we are, and the stories that they, so often the West, tell about us and tell on our behalf. Stories that are ultimately designed to other us, to make us appear less than, or at worst, to make us seem like a threat. And so these issues occur in the tensions where these different stories meet and the huge gap that is created between these stories. And so it goes back to what I always say on stages like this, which so many of you have grown tired of hearing me say, the stories matter because they are our armor, they are weaponized against us, and while they might not always be able to change the world, they certainly can change the world's perceptions. And so the challenge becomes, what type of stories do you tell that can cut through those tensions and can build a bridge over that gaping hole that's been created? Well, for Nader, the answer has been food. Because food, no one hates food. No one is angry at food. No one has resentments or fears over food. And so, Nader, you use a great phrase that I read that I will be stealing forevermore, where you say that the food is just a narrative Trojan horse. Because when you invite people to the table to taste and try something new, the proverbial table, the digital table in this case, essentially what you're doing is you're asking them to see the people behind the food in a new way. And in doing so, Nader has created an incredible global following around his compelling stories. And as a fellow storyteller, I'm so excited to be able to share the stage with him today. Ladies and gentlemen, Nader Nahdi.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate you.
That was it, Nader. We're done now.
Yeah, thanks
Okay.
for coming, guys. It's been great. We'll see you soon.
So, Nader, everyone previously was talking about food as memory. You talk a lot about food as memory. So I want to start by your earliest memory that food is more than just about eating and carries within it the richness of our stories.
Yeah, no, thank you, Amy. Firstly, thank you for doing this. Everyone who's involved in organizing, very grateful and appreciative to even be here, sharing stages with you, and just for understanding that food is so much more than actual ingredients on a table, that it's part and parcel of an ecosystem of stories and culture and traditions which we're all passionate about. So a big round of applause for everyone who's involved and toiled and troubled to make this happen today. We see you. Thank you so much for elevating conversation. First memory of food probably is very formative, early. I realized that actually it probably is linked to something that I'm quite insecure about. I come from a mixed household. And I felt like when I was younger, I was constantly grasping for validation from one of these cultures, right? It was like, oh, I want to feel part of this, but I always felt as someone who was mixed, I wasn't enough of this or enough of that. I was always on the periphery of said cultures. So what happened, food became an opportunity for me to actually prove to people that I knew more. My language might have been broken, or I might have spent less time in these places. But if I knew more about the food, then people would see, oh wow, this guy like knows what he's talking about through dishes. So I might not be able to tell you poetry in Arabic, but I might be able to tell you exactly how this zorbiyan is made from beginning to end. And that was my kind of insight into cultures that I feel very passionate about. So it started from very young, like being able to like share recipes with my father or a grandmother. And most of my grandparents died when I was very young. So I realized that it was through these recipes that I was learning, which I probably at the time hated cooking, hated making with them, but I've come to appreciate as memories, as formative memories that I've shared with elders, and windows into the culture that I feel really passionate about. So the earliest memory for me probably would have to be like a zurbiyan. In my house, every last Sunday we'd be cooking a zurbiyan, which is kind of like a Yemeni biryani for people who aren't familiar with it. Big pot of rice that you kind of uncover as your guests are there, and the steam kind of bellows into the room. You use a plate instead of a ladle to kind of pour it out en masse to like 30, 40 people that you've invited. That's the kind of household I grew up in. And that tradition itself is something that I've continued with my own community and friends. So like in my London context, every last Sunday, people know that the Nehdi house, you come, there's going to be a big pot of Zorbiyan. And we have like directors and filmmakers and artists and musicians and people within my kind of community coming in and sharing in that culture and that memory with me. And that's really special. So to be able to share probably the earliest memory I have of food with people that I come across on a daily basis all over the world is really special.
You know, speaking about community, when I posted that we were doing this talk today with Nader, I have never had so many messages and of people messaging me going, yo, Nader is my bro. So he really, did it happen with you as well? Nader knows everyone. He really has created compelling communities.
Terrible reputation. They're probably saying awful things. Everyone.
Nader, there was...
No, what were they saying?
Huh?
What were they saying?
I literally cannot say that in public.
Okay. No, never
I
mind.
can't say what I was saying about
that.
Nader in public.
Keep it moving. Keep it moving.
Nader, I mean, so much of these stories that we tell, and we were speaking about this earlier over coffee, is really kind of about the search for our own identity, whether we've grown up in very multicultural households or we felt ourselves to be minority. You said once that the digital world requires us to give ourselves a kind of tagline for our identity. Who is this? Oh, he's X. You kind of came to the conclusion that an easy way to explain yourself would be that you're a mix between the love child of Anthony Bourdain and Ibn Battuta. Oh no, you once said Anthony Bourdain and Riz Ahmed, but I didn't understand
Ibn Battuta
that.
fits, to be fair.
I found that one disconcerting, so I'm going to say...
I love that, actually. I'm going to say that. It works for me.
But Anthony Bourdain, Ibn Battuta. Now, of course, Ibn Battuta chronicled the world through his writing. Anthony Bourdain really mastered the medium of television. What do you think that digital storytelling demands of you that it didn't demand of them?
Well, interesting. Well, interesting take on that. I thought you were going to say something entirely different,
What
but
did
thank you for saying
that.
Say? Like, why Anthony Bourdain and why
obviously why
what the
Anthony
elements
Bourdain.
of that? Yeah, of course.
Allah yarhamhum الاثنين بقى بس.
But Allah yarham. But to answer that, let me give context why Bourdain. Bourdain was, we're all familiar with Anthony Bourdain, right? If you're familiar with his work, he was this white man who traveled the world and was able to draw lessons and stories in which we, as people from these worlds, felt attached to and really empathetic with. And he saw us, actually. He was the first food writer that I ever felt travel to these places and actually saw what we were about. And he was a deeply flawed person. He was a drug addict. He was had issues with his work, and he never shied away from accepting that. And there's something really, really... and that's why he was able to mobilize such a young audience to feeling really attached to him. Now, I feel like if Anthony Bourdain was able to go to said culture and experience X as a white man, imagine young people from said culture, what they would be experiencing in the same culture. Because he had his own limitations. He didn't understand cultural nuance in the same way that we might have as people who grew up in these situations and understanding the kind of cultural cadence which operates in these places. So maybe we could experience Y and Z also. So I feel like there are abilities that we have as storytellers within our own community to experience even more eclectic, dynamic, cosmopolitan culture that Bourdain couldn't. And we just have to capture the essence of what Bourdain was about. And a lot of that essence was just humanness, flawed. He was a deeply problematic individual. Anyone who worked with, I've been working with his former team recently. Anyone who worked with Bourdain would tell you that he is difficult. He was incredibly direct, incredibly, OCD about certain things, but also just can be quite scathing to people. But he never shied away from that, and his humanness made him ultimately relatable as an individual. And in our cultures, I found, interestingly, is that we have to be pristine, we have to be perfect, it has to be right. Otherwise, the whole world comes down showering critique on you, right? Where's the room for the human, the mistakes, the young Arab person who is navigating spirituality and culture, like most of us in the region, and messing it up and getting it wrong, but like being honest about it. And then that narrative throughout the period of their career or whatever story they're telling, seeing that evolution and that growth. But I felt as someone who is brown, who is Arab and from the region, is that you have to be representative of the culture in a way that people expect it of you. And we're not afforded the luxury of being humans in progress. But it's that progress which allows the stories that we're trying to tell to really have a magic about them. And that's what I would love to see more available in the region in terms of personalities and storytelling.
I think for me, when I, from the outside in, I think, and we discussed this earlier as well, perhaps one of the biggest differences and challenges between being a documentarian on digital spaces to your predecessors is this idea of daily consistency, the sheer amount of content and creative output that you have to do constantly far exceeds anything that happened before. And I know that's taken its toll on you, Nader.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I'm not that guy that's like, I understand in this space, consistency is the game. So like, there might be people who don't have no idea what I do. So just to give you context, I tell stories online, and the idea behind it is I want to capture the essences of our culture and tell stories about them in a way that I lived and experienced them, which was eclectic, beautiful, dynamic, and relatable. So how do I make young people feel like their cultures are really important, aspirational? Like my go-to, my goal is like when a young person sees their culture and thinks, oh shit, like we're really cool people. That's really dope. This is something really to be proud of. And that's the energy I'm trying to capture in essence. So in doing that, I'm also operating in a system, a digital system, which is all about consistency and volume. So for, Amy, you know more than anyone. The way this game works is that the algorithm favors the more content you're putting out there. But then if I'm pushing the wheel and trying to get as many stories out there, then what's happening is the quality of those stories will diminish because I'm forcing it, as opposed to naturally allowing a story to come to me and learning about it, taking time to understand the nuance, and when it's ready, telling the story that needs to be told. But right now, what I feel, one of the challenges in documenting for the digital age is that Case very eloquently talked about the colonial histories that we have and empire. But right now, the empire of today is the algorithm, right? It's the algorithm that is determining what we see. And if colonialism determined what was archived, the algorithm is now determining what we're seeing on a daily basis. So how do we play this algorithm is going to be our challenge as storytellers, and using the algorithm on itself is the biggest challenge of any creative storyteller today.
And the algorithm favors, and I think you're operating this interesting dichotomy, Nader, where it is so important to you to showcase the nuances of the communities that you spotlight, because the misunderstandings about them come from a lack of nuance. But the algorithm favors a hook and favors aesthetic over honesty or humanity or humility or heritage or history. And yet, where I think you found your greatest forte, and we'll talk about the different mediums that you operate in, is actually on two of the platforms that by default scrape away at nuance, TikTok and Instagram. How have you managed, but you do a very unique thing where you do somehow manage to create these multi-layered and very rich stories. What's the secret, Nader?
Yeah, if you're speaking specifically about these kind of viral videos that I do where I take an ingredient and I go through the history of it, those do really well. Those get like millions of views every time I do it. And And I think what you master in this space is the format of the storytelling on these platforms. So for example, I could break down the mechanics of a viral video very easy. If you follow the format and you mildly have something interesting to say, I can guarantee you'll very likely go viral. Of course, there are other subtle nuances that go into that. But like you said, the first 15 seconds are the most important. It goes into the substance, and later on there's a takeaway. And all my stories follow that structure. But also I'm vulnerable to the platform changing. Maybe the algorithm changes next week and suddenly the format that I've done doesn't work anymore. So these are some of the challenges that I have to face. But to challenge you also is that, yes, in some sense those videos have done really well, but do I perceive them as the most valuable? Does virality equal value? And I'm challenging that even in my own work right now, because I actually think personally some of the most valuable things I've done have not been viral. Actually, very few people have seen it. Like the virality of the work that I've done, yes, has a value in terms that it allows people to see what I do, but the value I really see is stuff when it takes it from a digital experience and allows people to participate in said culture. That I'm really passionate about, right? So let's say I made a video about Egypt and it went viral, cool. Like what makes a video about Egypt really interesting to me is that how I inform people about something they didn't know before, that they want to participate in it in their real life. That conversion to me is really magic. So maybe I get people to turn up to a physical event and participate in the culture that I've documented before. That transition was what going to determine the next 10 years, especially when we're talking about the advent of like the digital world and AI, and if an AI bot can make a better video than I ever could, then what's going to make me stand out in this context is my ability to actually draw crowds into an offline space, and that's really special. So yeah, that's what I'm passionate about. So I'm less concerned about numbers these days. Interestingly, I'm interested in telling the story that needs to be told. And there's a big difference in that, and I kind of said it before, but I don't want the algorithm to tell me what's successful and what I should be telling anymore. And that you can fall in that trap because you get this endorphin fix, but like, oh my God, I got like 10 million views on that video, that's crazy. And then you're like financially dependent on that because companies come and of course they sponsor your content and that's how you make work. This is the business of what we do, right? But part of me is like, forget all of that. Like, what was a story that I want to tell because I feel like this is an important story to tell? And what's interesting over the next 5-10 years is that young people are growing up in culture where it's viral culture. It's where we're all watching the same videos. Isn't that crazy? Like an American kid from New York is watching the same videos. We were in Nawaya, in the farms of Cairo, and there was this kid on his phone watching a Bad Bunny video. And I was like, this is nuts. Like they are inputting the same cultural references. So for me, I'm just kind of like, less what the algorithm tells me what to do, but what's really subversive in terms of what I feel like our people maybe need to hear.
Yeah, I completely feel you, Neda. That's certainly one of the biggest challenges that we face. And I also notice it a lot when new writers come into our ecosystem and they will work so hard on crafting a beautiful, in-depth feature, and we will spend so much time editing and documenting, and it never performs as well as. So, I mean, interestingly, one of the highest performing pieces of content on Scene Eats this year, speaking about food, was the guy هو كان في وسط البلد ولا في الزمالك, the guy who puts shawarma in croissants. And so, yeah, you see, look at your reaction. And so you have all these incredible stories we tell, and then suddenly this 15-second video gets 15 million likes. So my question to you is that I'm always so desperate for people to see the other content. So my question to you, Nader, what is a story that meant so much to you and was so important to you and you feel didn't get the visibility that it deserved?
Great question, Amy.
But you're not actually answering any of my questions because you're doing that very smart thing
what am I, like,
where you tell the
politically
story
meandering
that you
around
need.
it?
No, but you're telling, they're beautiful stories.
Oh,
I don't want to
hold me
stop
to
you from
that.
telling them. I don't
No,
want to.
no, no,
Don't get in
sorry.
your head or anything about
ADHD,
it,
I go all
Ned.
over the
I
place.
totally
Just
understand.
like keep me on
No,
the.
I will keep going. Okay.
So,
Stories. Choose the story.
What was the question again?
I don't know.
So, you're talking about the story that I feel I didn't get enough eyes on it, right? I feel like personally, I did a story on Swahili culture. The idea behind it was the Swahili culture, the coast of Zanzibar, Kenya, and these are really special places because they're one of the first instances of truly diverse international communities. You had Arabs, you had Africans, you had Asians coming through via waterways and created a really unique culture that was Swahili, but the Arab didn't feel any less African, the African didn't feel any less Asian, and vice versa, etc. And because it's such a small community in comparatively to the rest of the world, it didn't have as much emotional investment from other people to feel like they want to share it. Like Swahili culture in the US, for example, why am I emotionally invested in this community enough to share that with my own network? And I feel like it didn't get enough. And that's part of the challenge, is realizing, okay, cool, like maybe I didn't tell the story well enough, but how should I have told that story of Swahili people in a way that related to a universal audience? Maybe actually the fault was on me as opposed to the actual culture itself. But part of the challenge of storytellers is finding those through lines, which allows us to relate to people across the board, despite what culture you're from. And a really easy exercise that I love to kind of demonstrate this point is, put your hand up if you are Egyptian. Put your hand up if you are not Egyptian. Put your hand up if you are married. Put your hand up if you're single. You see how everyone looks around in the room to see who's single and who's not? Crazy. That was the easiest trap you ever fell in. Put your hand up if you've lost someone you loved before. Put your hand up if you've fallen in love before. You see how people before have this identity in which they kind of hold onto, and they put their hand up, or what they think they are and what they're not. And then when you ask them very universal human emotions, suddenly everyone breaks those identities and realize that actually the emotions that bring us together are very similar. So it's like, what are those core values that we're trying to capture in a video and digitizing it? And that gives us an opportunity to connect with cultures outside of our own.
So another big, speaking on that is, so there's figuring out how to package the story, but increasingly it's also figuring out which is the best digital medium for the story. You really work across mediums. You write these great city guides on Substack, rooted in your own personal experience. We talked about the Instagram and TikTok. You have experimented with a lot of longer form content as well on YouTube. And at times you do these, IRL events where you actually invite the audience to literally taste and try the story. How do you decide which story belongs on which medium, and where do you feel like you're your most authentic self?
Yeah, great question. We kind of had a conversation earlier about this, but I feel very passionate about Substack right now. I feel like Substack is really exciting because...
Who's on Substack?
Yeah,
I cannot
it doesn't surprise
urge you
me
enough.
In this room, actually.
Huh? Okay, amazing. Everyone needs... Oh, thank you. Everyone, I'm actually just promoting myself right now.
No, I love that.
But thank you for being here.
This was really your plan, wasn't it?
I know, this was my plan all along. Thank you. Everyone needs to get on Substack. It is just the most extraordinary platform, and I don't know how long it's going to stay so pure for, but it's just a space without all of the crazy advertising and ads, and outside of the algorithm, where people really do share very rich and meaningful 100%. Stories. Get on Substack. Back to the question.
There's a few reasons why I think. The beginning of any platform is really amazing. Like if you were there through the first editions of YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, they usually tend to start really great, right? Even Tinder and like Hinge in the beginning are really great.
Tell us more about that.
And then they become terrible after a while.
Okay.
Moving on. They platforms in the beginning have a great kind of initial success, and the curve kind of dips. But Substack is special, I think, also, and it doesn't surprise me that people in this room, majority of you, are on Substack, because it takes a certain nuanced individual to be on Substack. Reading is a lot. Not everyone reads. It takes a level of like intellectual inquiry, curiosity, and because there's an extra level or barrier to entry, the people usually that are reading your stuff are actually deeply interested in what you have to say. Like video is a graveyard of opinions, right? It's you put something on TikTok, you've watched it, and you swipe up, or you've seen something on TikTok, you comment something really salacious or bad, and you just move on, whatever, right? But Substack are people really interested in what you have to say, and there's a topic that you're sharing, and people want to engage in that discourse. And that's what makes it really unique for me at the moment. And it's just very empowering. So part of the challenge of storytellers is like staying true to your voice, right? But as a storyteller, there's also a business game to play, which is a really important element of it for young people thinking of getting into it. How do I remain sustainable to tell the stories that I intuitively feel like I need to say? So what is financial security in the context of that? Which is very hard, right? The business model, to give you a very brief insight, is like I will have like brands and companies and organizations that will have a theme in which they want to explore, and they will commission you to explore that theme, and you have to find a midway point between what I want to say and what they want to say. But sometimes their intentions are so magnetic that it takes away from the story that you need to tell. So that's the tension that we're kind of exploring, right? But if I'm able to be financially independent, irrespective of them, then I can tell pure stories in the way that I believe that they should be told. And Substack and the subscription models are very useful in telling that. The problem is that we all have like 10 subscriptions at the same time. So you can't be like subscribing to Amy and Huda and Nader and paying £4 or £5 each, because financially it gets difficult. So that's the challenge that the model will have eventually at some point in the future. But it is empowering as a storyteller to be able to have access to that direct relationship with your consumer.
You know, speaking as, I think it's when you're consuming content from an individual as opposed to an institution, it's very easy to forget that, especially if it's an individual like Nader who is creating meaningful and impactful content, it's very easy to forget that this is also that person's livelihood. And we develop this kind of expectation about where you should always be, especially when it comes to, going back to what we said at the beginning, movements in the world. I read something, and I would love for you to share that story, because it resonated a lot with me, because we faced something similar after October 7th on our platforms, where when that happened, you, as so many of us creators within the region or of the region, really doubled down on just focusing on amplifying Palestinian voices and the stories that were coming out of, the horrifying stories that were coming out of the genocide. But at some point, you needed to pay the bills. And so you reverted back to some brand content.
Yeah.
And you faced some real problems out of that.
Yeah, these are some of the kind of ethical challenges, which I love to share, because I'm still negotiating this. I think people also forget that like we're still the first generation of people that are using these platforms, right? So we're trying to negotiate these pitfalls and these calamities with everybody. So we can take everything, the genocide in Palestine as a case study, everything that happened in October 7th that happened. And of course, my platform was built on social justice and telling stories that I feel like need to be told. And of course, naturally, I'm going to speak loudly and proudly, as I've always done, right? But then I had like 15, 16 brand retainers contracts, and they literally went overnight. So imagine like financial forecasting over the next like 2.5 years, probably wiped out, right? Then I had a job in New York. My visa gets banned. I'm not allowed to enter the States in like 4 years. So then really everything that I've built over the last like 5 years is crumbling before my eyes. And there's an emotional kind of shock to that. But you wouldn't have done things any differently. But this is just the way the world works. And you're trying to piece together how to kind of salvage this. And then you don't put out anything out there out of respect. And then what happens is your savings start to slowly dwindle, of course. And then how do you make money in a context where the only story worth being told in that context is one of genocide and pain and hurt? And I'm working with food. Of all the commodities I could be working with, food, where somewhere else in the world, food is such a scarcity. And this was some of the challenges that I had to face. And everyone has a different opinion about it. So I focused my platform really for 6 months about Palestinian stories, etc. And then eventually had to transition back into like normal stuff. And of course, people are going to be upset and angry about it. But there are also people that understand it, right? And really, we have to think about our value as storytellers is speaking truth to power. So the financial security and livelihoods of these storytellers is also important. Because if you cut them from their lifeline, then who's telling these stories in the first place? So there's a balance and a tension here that needs to be reconciled. But also, there is a responsibility, and we can't shy away from that. And I really want, and when we talked about Anthony Bourdain and what he's successful to, or what he doesn't have to go through, what I have to go through that he doesn't, it's questions like this. And it is unfair. Our people have to be bigger and better than majority of the global north. We have to embody values and ethics and morality, which they don't. And it's unfair. I'll be honest with you, it's not fair, because we have to be more. We have to be better, we have to excel, and we have to like embody even better values. But this is just the reality of the world. What am I gonna do, like sit here and complain about it? I'm like, I wouldn't have done anything differently. Yes, it was stressful. Yes, it was painful. Yes, like I didn't want to tell my parents like exactly how bad it was, so I don't want them to stress out about it. But this is the reality of the world. Would I rather have that issue than be in actual Gaza itself and like going through what they're going through? So everyone has like a modicum of effort or sacrifice for a better world that we're all trying to build here. And look, I got into stories for moments like this, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity to remind myself of it. Because at times, this world can be distracting. It's glamorous, you meet cool people, you're flying to like amazing places, and that intention runs away sometimes. You forget about it. And I'm just being very honest with you, right? As someone who's like forgotten what the MO was, right? And then you have moments like that where a dark thought in your brain is like, maybe you shouldn't post that because that big deal might go away. And then you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like you shake your head, you're like, this is not what I got into this for, right? So thank God for those moments of reminding me like what this really is about. So yeah, like I'm grateful for everything that happened through it.
Speaking about that responsibility, Nader, overall, when it comes to your content, what do you want the people who consume it to do differently or feel differently when they interact with your content or come across your content?
Yeah, no, great question. I think it's about participation, right? Like, I'll be honest with you, like one of the challenges that I face is like, am I fossilizing? Am I fetishizing? Am I crystallizing culture, right? Like as someone who's really passionate about our cultures, when I capture a snapshot, is it just this moment in which I thought was really romantic and I want to capture it because people will relate to it? That's very basic in my opinion, right? The next level is being like, how do we get people to participate in their daily lives? That is what I want people to take away from it. Let's say, for example, like through Cairo Fashion Week, which I'm really excited about, and people like Reem and Sharif have helped. Cairo Food Week, Allahu Akbar.
We tried to do a Cairo Fashion Week. That's a different
I don't
story.
know where that came from.
Oh my God, edit that out.
That came from somewhere else. I am so sorry. Cairo Food Week. Rewind, yeah. They were so helpful in taking me around, but we're trying to do the story about this, the Karkideh man, right? Which I thought was really fun, and we've been looking for this guy. And the story about the Karkideh man, yes, it's someone even since I coming to Egypt as a young boy, remember this guy in traditional clothes selling you Karkideh, and he's like he's a bit goofy and silly. And I was telling you a bit about this before, is it might seem mundane and a bit kind of cheesy, but as I get older, I've started to realize how valuable these interactions were with people. Like for a moment, this man comes and you feel his presence because he's so loud, clattering the tambourines in his hand and he's singing. But whatever you're going through in that day, it might be really seriously bad or just whatever mundane stress you might have. You're kind of taken away from that moment and that interaction. And today, the modern world, the industrialized world, we go into the dukan, we buy like a bottle of water or a bottle of Karkideh, and we're done. But something as simple as a transaction of drinks, an exchange of drinks, was a deeply spiritual, social moment, right? This guy is serving you a drink, yes, but your soul felt a bit lighter. He remembered your name, he told you a joke, or he knew your grandparents and whatever. These interactions are slowly dying away in the modern world. That makes me really sad, and capturing that was through the lens of Karkideh, yes, but it had nothing really to do with Karkideh. It was about these interactions, these Egyptian interactions, which ties the fabric of society together, and preserving that memory. And like these are the things which I'm really passionate about, and getting people to see, when they see him next time, be like, you know what, like that's really cool.
It's so funny you say that because for years we had a Karkideh man outside of our office at the Green Campus in West al-Balad. And I had just taken his presence there for granted always. And only when you were posting those stories did I think for a second, what's his deal? What's going on? Where are the rest of them? What's the story? And so it's hugely impactful.
And I'm learning a lot just like through like researching about it more. But like you look at the Karkideh man and today, and like his clothes are tattered, the vase is broken. And there's a poetry about that, right? These used to be very proud people. Like they were commissioned from the Sultan to like distribute drinks that traditionally were kept in the palaces, right? And the idea behind it was they were doing a spiritual act of serving the people in the blazing heat. These people had social status. They weren't like people that you ignored or just thought, oh, here we go. These were people that had value in society. People look forward to see them. And these are the things which I think our culture is starting to like devalue. And I'm really passionate about changing that, because what's going to take us away from this AI future and this digitized world is a reminder of these human moments. What's more human than the Karkideh man? And these are things that I'm passionate about preserving and getting people to participate in.
I can speak to Nader forever, so I'm going to keep going, and just someone needs to like raise their hands when it's time for us to stop talking. You were talking about this idea of fossilizing the stories,
Yeah.
unwittingly fossilizing the stories. There's something, and it's only started to happen in maybe the last couple of years. And I understand that it's coming from a good place, but I also find it deeply problematic. I am such a visceral believer in the importance, like you, of us reclaiming our narratives and sharing them back out into the world, and us owning our stories before they're owned for us. But I started to hear this counter narrative to that idea of fuck them. Why do we have to prove ourselves? Why do we have to justify ourselves? Our desire and our need to do that comes from these kind of colonialism traumas that we carry, colonialist traumas that we carry within us. I'd be really interested in, and especially from this younger generation that's coming up, who wonderfully are very much rooted in pride of their culture in a way that maybe we didn't have so much. I'm interested in hearing your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much about this. Also, it's important to acknowledge that my context is different, right? I was born and raised in London, in the home of the colonial empire, and that's a part of my dynamic, etc. And also what I love about my life is that I spent half my life in Europe and I spent half my life in the Middle East. And I get to benefit from being a Londoner and understanding my place as a brown man in the capital of empire. But then I get to leave that and I get to come to Egypt where they think about that less. And what I love about art in this region is that its source isn't the empire. It's not the starting point anyway, right? But in London, for a lot of us, we're trying to prove who we are as minorities constantly. It's like, oh my goodness. But think about Egyptian art, Egyptian cinema, Egyptian culture. No way could it have been born if it started from that minority inferiority complex, right? There's a pride here that exists, which I love kind of absorbing, and I'm very passionate about just taking as much of that energy as I can and taking that back to the West with me. There's also a romance in which I see this world in which maybe people here have kind of just forgotten by virtue of living it daily, right? And I love being able to see that in that romantic way, these little things in which maybe people have just been like, oh yeah, these things just happen. But for me, one of the things I want to break away from is this victim mindset, right? Like we talk about colonialism, but colonialism also occupies our minds, right? It's not my end, it's not my beginning point, and I don't want it to be my end point. What we really have to start thinking about is who we are as people outside this dynamic of the white man, of empire. Who we are, the beauty of our culture, the essence of our culture, if it didn't have that tension and that struggle. And I think we struggle with that. It's so consuming, this history, that it always goes back to this moment in time in history, that it's crippled what we could be. And I'm really passionate about where our culture goes, right? Don't get me wrong, I don't know if this is disrespectful to the space, but I actually think the least interesting thing in Egypt is the pyramids, right? Culture is alive in Egypt. It's not an archaeological site. Culture is breathing, it's alive, it's dynamic, and these are the things that I'm so excited about experiencing. I was actually speaking to a curator here, at the gala event, and he's doing really interesting thing of curating events of how do we take these archaeological
Amr
sites.
is here, right? Or did Amr run away?
No, there he is. I can see him.
There you go. You're the curator. Okay.
And he was telling me interesting things of them curating events about how do we take it from archaeological sites, but immersive, breathing culture all the way till today. And that's really exciting to me. So that is what I'm really passionate about how our cultures are alive. And let me just tell you, because I know time is short, but these are the things I'm thinking about right now, right? I realize that people think that I document identity and culture. But really, it's not about that. I'm not trying to be oh, look how amazing we were in the past and how romantic we are about the past. There's this amazing quote that a friend of mine used to say, an infatuation with our identities limits our identities, right? We're not who we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 2,000 years ago. We are who we decide to be in these moments. And I'm really excited about exploring what those could be. Yes, I love culture. I'm obsessed with culture. I've built a whole career around culture. But I also accept that some elements of our culture have to die. There's some things about our cultures that are crippling us, anchoring us.
Like what, Nader?
It varies from place to place. I'm trying to speak as generically as possible without getting into...
No, عادي.
Huda's like...
اتفضل. Huda, stop looking at him.
I'm joking. I'm joking. But for example, I can talk within my own cultural framework, there's things that I'm uncomfortable about. And I mix, so I get to nip and tuck between what I want. But I go to Yemen and I don't like that I don't see women as often as I would like, right? Especially as being such formative influences in my life. And like, I feel like half of my influence is taken away from me. And I don't have that opportunity, right? There are, of course, like it operates within its own cultural cadence and there's a significance to it and it's beautiful in its own way. But there are other cultural things like stigma, being perfect, spiritual expectations of young people. These are things in which we need to navigate in the modern world for young people to feel like they can be experimentative, they can be creatively pioneering. But if we hold them to these anchors, then the culture's not going to go anywhere. Like, yes, kushri is cool, but like, what's the new dish that we're going to be creating that 100 years from now, they're going to be like, whoa, this dish was like made in 2025, it was super dope. I'm like, cool. Like, yes, what I'm really like perplexed about is when culture becomes culture. Let's take Egypt, for example, right? How much cultural influence since the dawn of time has Egypt have over millennia? But then suddenly we've coined this moment in time to be indicative of what Egyptian culture is, instead of understanding that really the power of Egyptian culture is its malleability to absorb whatever comes in and out of it, right? And that is powerful, and that is the stuff I think we should be focusing on, because I actually don't think Egypt's power is what it was. I actually think of what it could be. And like, this is the stuff I'm really interested in how young people navigate, explore, and I think that's a powerful question to like get into deeper.
That's really interesting. And we just to take it back to food momentarily, our regional recipes have survived wars and colonization and migrations and modernity. They don't need rescuing. They have proven their resilience, and inherent within them is this idea of adaptation. And I'm always a little this obsession that we have, chefs, brands, content creators, digital creators, of let's remix, let's modernize Middle Eastern food, let's remix Middle Eastern food. That is its essence. It was here before you and it will survive after you, and it is ingrained into our contemporary culture, irrespective of your clickbait.
Yeah, like for example, let's take kushri for example, because it's easy, it's a national dish, etc. Right? Like kushri, do people know how kushri came to Egypt? From Port Said, yeah, that was definitely a gateway through. But you know who actually brought the idea of like lentils and cooked lentils into a stew? It was like, from what I understand and from the research I've heard and from anecdotal spoken histories, the Brits came, they had Indian workforce laborers, and they brought them as indentured laborers here into Egypt, and they created something called khichdi, which I grew up eating on my Pakistani side of the family. Khichdi is this lentil-based curry, basically, right? They came to Egypt, they naturalized, they became part and parcel of Egyptian culture, and they basically deconstructed it, also incorporating the Italian influence, the French influence, and created kushri, which is basically deconstructed khichdi, right? So kushri, which is indicative of Egyptian pride, national identity, is formed by so many other influences. And this is a great question because it makes me question, what is Egyptian in the first place, right? But sometimes somebody, some state tells you like, this is Egyptian. And what it does is limits your identity or your perspective of what you believe to be Egyptian. When actually it's infinite, it's boundless. And that's the power of what being Egyptian is about. And like, just kushri is an insight into how that works in a case study, right? But yeah, the culture can be so much more. I'm just excited in expanding the horizons of what we think this culture can go into.
What do you think, it's speaking of that richness and diversity and all of these multicultural influences, and yet when you look at the story of Middle Eastern food especially, although I hate the word Middle Eastern, but I'm yet to come up with an alternative. Do you have an alternative for it yet, Nadir?
No,
you say child of the Indian Ocean.
Yeah,
Tell us about that. I like that.
I had this thing where I gave a talk about children of the Indian Ocean, which I probably is the only way really that makes sense to identify myself. So for context, on my father's side, I'm Yemeni, Indonesian. On my mother's side, I'm Kenyan, Pakistani. So we grew up in a very mixed household, right? And people think, wow, those cultures are so far between. But actually they're not. They are linked, they are tied by this body of water, the Indian Ocean. And I have this theory where I really believe that culture passes more freely across water than it does land, right? A Yemeni has more in common with an Indian than he does with an Iraqi. Topography, culture, food, they're very different, right? Water as this energy source, which is absorbent, it has inherent spiritual value. It can contains energy. And I believe in these things in the genesis of a culture have an impact and an influence. If you go across the coastal cultures across the Indian Ocean, where it's South Africa, all the way to East Africa, to Yemen, to Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, they are very similar. and you can taste the similarity, right? Food usually is the cipher. It's the first place you should look. If you look at the food, you break down the ingredients, or you even just taste it, you can see that there's a history here. There's shared elements that are going on. And I found familiarity across the Indian Ocean with people from it, and that's why I always like kind of coin myself as like child of the Indian Ocean. But I did a talk about it, and it was basically an immersive talk where people could actually eat as I was pertaining or narrating stories of my own grandparents and how they met.
Did you see that one, Hora? It's a really interesting format for maybe Food Week next year. Actually, it was very cool.
Yeah,
If he comes back, I take a commission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, to bring me back now, Hoda. She's holding it to you on stage. But yeah, I think it's a beautiful concept because what it does is just challenge ideas of like these lines that we've accepted as lines, right? This is Egypt, and we all know who drew that line, but why have we accepted it? It baffles me, right? Like it's like, and we become so passionate about it. Football teams, national identity, food. Right. These things didn't exist previously like this. It wasn't, and I'm just really passionate about. Hopefully, my dream model is that we kind of do away with that respectfully, and being like, you know, what other human values connects us other than these arbitrary lines that which we've seemingly accepted in the world. Very bizarre to me. And as someone who's mixed, maybe it's because I'm mixed that I just kind of intuitively understood that when I was younger. But
so growing up, this question was the bane of my life growing up, but I had some clarity on how to answer it. It was simpler for me, but I hate this question, but I'll ask it to you because I think it's very pertinent for you. Growing up, when someone would say, "No, but Nader, where are you from?" Right? What would you answer?
You want the long answer or the long answer?
Okay.
I would tell them, you know, you can tell when as someone who's grown up being asked that question, you can tell the intention behind it, right? So if someone's really genuinely like interested in learning, I'll tell them the long answer. I'd be like, born and raised in London, but parents are from X, Y, Z, and tell them the whole narrative. If it's someone who doesn't really care, then I'll say London. And then they'll be like, where are you really from? And I'll be like, London. And then just close this topic and just let it be. Yeah, like it's one of those things that we talk about a lot, especially back in the West. But like, I'm also just love challenging people's idea of like where you think I need to be from, and if I can like change someone's opinion in that interaction, then cool. But also, to be honest, I also don't care. Like, I understand. Like I know it's cool to be like, oh, like accept the question is wrong or whatever, and a lot of people saying that, but like. I understand I'm a brown guy living in the UK. Come on, Aslan. I'm not from here, obviously. So like, he's curious, right? So I don't want to be like, oh, what are you trying to say that I'm not from here? Oh, I'm not trying to start a fight. I get it. So I'll be like, look, I'm from London. And he'll be like, oh, but what about your parents? And I'll tell him, yeah, of course, like from back in the day, like my parents are from whatever. But it just depends on the power in the question. If I feel like there's a bit of like negative intent with the question, then I'll answer it with negative intent. I think the great thing about Gen Z right now is that they just don't give up.
They don't
care, right? They're confrontational. Yeah. They'll challenge you, and I kind of like that energy.
I think they're going to change the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kill us in the process.
Yeah, maybe. It's either or. It's a fine line between the two.
Either they're going to eat us or AI is going to eat us. Well, I'm not sure which one. Yeah.
Can I ask a question though for the Egyptians in the room? Like, as someone who documents culture, etc., I'd love to learn how like. We talk a lot about like what people contribute to a certain society, but I would love to learn how you would like people to come and visit you, right? And there's a different nuance there because usually it's the other way around, right? Like people visit Egypt and they come and they take. But like, what would you like people coming into this country to take from you? What are these values that are purely you feel are Egyptian, that you're proud of, that you would love people to document and capture? Like, what are those things?
You know, it goes back to what you were saying earlier, and I say this a lot, that we, as Egyptians, there's this double-edged sword that we navigate where this incredible history has defined us to the world in a very powerful, positive way, right? It's shaped the world's imagination. Every child grows up with this fantasy of ancient Egypt, and that's a beautiful thing to have. But the problem is that it does exactly what you said. It fossilizes us. And it gives you very little, when you come to Egypt and you have the pyramids and Luxor and Aswan and these temples, you have so little incentive to uncover and discover the vibrancy of our contemporary culture. I mean, our media platforms were created to tell the stories of the people and movements shaping Egypt now. And I am always so desperate for when people, and so I love what you do, Nader, that for when people come to Egypt to tell those stories. I think though we have a responsibility institutionally to create opportunities for tourists and travelers to be able to have access and experience our contemporary culture. I don't know if that's our strength yet.
Maybe this ancient pharaonic culture is the Trojan horse, right? This is what
Maybe
people
it
comes
is.
in.
I
and then
agree it is. If I can get them into the museum, I got them here to come to the pyramids and to the museum. And as I always say, Nader, okay, well then what's next?
Exactly. 100%.
What's the next story that
100%.
we tell? And I think those are, I feel we have such an obligation to tell those stories.
As a storyteller, like I said, I'm always in this like tension of like wanting to like be on the avant-garde of like what culture is tomorrow, but not be stuck in the past. And I'll give you like a very real case study of how this plays out in a real day-to-day life. Thank you for the nod. But okay, how does this play out in a day-to-day life that's probably a bit more relatable? Okay, I haven't shared this before, and I know it's being recorded by like 8 cameras, so it's probably going to end up somewhere. But
they're all my cameras.
But for example, I'd never. That's probably the worst case scenario that could have happened. But I'd never been on a blind date before. See, the silence in the room. I'd never been on a blind date before. And then my friend of mine was like, nah, they're like, there's this girl I think you should meet. And I would really love to set it up for you. And I was like, you know what? You caught me at a good time. And I was like, a bit kind of apprehensive at first. And I was like, cool, go ahead, do it. And he was so detailed about this date. He gave us a dress code. He told us where we're gonna go. He's like, this is what you're gonna do. He was like, yeah, just being very prescriptive about where this date was gonna be. And we ended up on this date, a very simple, chill coffee by the beach. And I arrive, and then she arrives, and she's lovely. She's like, she's beautiful. She's like really amazing, really nice, pleasant. We chat. She's Palestinian. She works in the preservation of Palestinian art and culture, and we had lots of chats and lots of back and forth, and we were really getting on. And then she's really passionate about the preservation of culture, especially for people in the context of everything that's happening. And then she goes to me, well, then I go to her. I just had this thought, and I was like, I think it's amazing, like how dedicated you are in the preservation of your people's culture and heritage. But it got me thinking also, like, does this trickle down to your romantic life also? Is the preservation of your culture, does it play out in who you romantically are interested in? And she was like, had this realization in her face. She was like, huh. And she hadn't put two and two together that those were kind of similar things. And she goes to me, I guess. And then we kind of stared at each other at this moment of her realization. I was like, I get it. Like, I totally get it. Like, you know, for her, her culture means so much to her and the preservation of it, that of course it's going to have like a trickle-down effect on other elements of her life, especially romance. And then I kind of challenged her. I was like, so what is important to preserve in a romantic context? Is it a set of genetics, Palestinian genetics? Is this what's really important to preserve? Is it a set of traditions and culture that you're really passionate about? For example, you could date a Palestinian guy, and he's like, knows nothing about Palestine. And I've met people like that. Very limited like cultural awareness and nuance of who they are. You could date a non-Palestinian guy, and he knows everything about it. He's at the protests. He's really clued up, educated, and the first guy in the fight for justice. Is which one of those do you pick? Because what are you really passionate about preserving? And I think she was just so overwhelmed of how deep this conversation was for her first blind date that it was just like she'd never really thought about these things in this way. But these are the kind of tensions we are facing as people who are third culture, who are like navigating the culture inside the home and outside the home. But this is how it might play out in a very human interaction, right? And it also plays out in my work. So just to give you an insight of like how we as a generation are figuring these out for the first time, and we're gonna get it wrong, some of it we're gonna get it right, but the most important thing is that we allow people to have that journey of, that creative journey of getting it wrong and right at the same time.
So, Nader, what do you look for in a woman? No, I'm joking.
I was about to answer it. I was like, well.
I'm joking. Nader, final question. Final question. I've got to ask, it's a cliche question, but we're here, so I have to ask it. Your ultimate dinner table, Nader, where is it? What are you cooking and who's at it?
What am I cooking? I'm probably cooking nasi padang, which I don't know if anyone knows. Yeah, nasi padang is basically Indonesian island padang food, which basically is, I don't know if you've seen pictures, but it's a table spread with lots of small plates, filled with small plates stacked on top, and you get like 20 varieties of different curries and grills, and delicious. That's like my prison meal, if my last meal. Who am I with? It would probably be with, not to make it heavy, but like my late father. I would love to have another meal with him. Muhammad Ali. I would love to have one of my greatest heroes ever. And probably, I know, like Jesus, Prophet Muhammad. Be like, yo, like, what's the truth, bro?
Given
What's going on?
so all of these cultural influences, where are you having this dinner?
Egypt, obviously.
In Egypt, okay.
Come on.
Nader
Crazy
Nahdi,
question.
thank
Crazy
you
question.
very much
Thank
for
you,
being
Amy,
here
and
today.
thank you, everybody.